rozpoczęcie. Kolejne wydarzenie Campus Polska 2026, dzień pierwszy. Waszymi gośćmi będzie Zanda Kalnina-Lukasewica, Dowil Sakalin, James O'Brien, a rozmowę poprowadzi Katarzyna Piekarska. Bardzo proszę, zapraszam Państwa. Wielkie brawa! Powitajmy na scenie naszych wspaniałych gości z zagranicy, natomiast rozmowę, poprowadzi pani profesor Katarzyna Pisarska. Wielkie brawa!
Welcome everybody. How are we doing today? Good moods? Fantastic. It's a great pleasure for me to be moderating this panel entitled Home Alone, Can Europe Defend Itself? We are really looking forward to your contributions, to your questions, to discussions, because we are going to talk actually about existential things. Can we defend ourselves as a continent? Can we defend ourselves as countries, European countries, against existential threats? And with me here are three fantastic speakers, but most importantly, accomplished politicians and diplomats, people who have been on the front lines of diplomacy, of politics, and most importantly on security, to have this discussion. So we'll start with a question that I think will frame the type of threats we're looking at currently. And I'm very honored to just welcome and introduce Zanda, who is a member of parliament of Latvia, but most importantly is a deputy speaker of the parliament. Zanda, great to have you here with us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. Hi.
Just next door, Lithuania, Dovile Sakalina, who is a member of parliament of Lithuania, but also former, just very recently, Minister of Defense of her country. Dovile, great to have you here.
Well,
and last but definitely not least, Jim O'Brien, who was Assistant Secretary for Europe and Eurasia under the Biden administration, also dealing with a special envoy, I think, dealing with, if I remember, prisoner swaps, among others. Okay, so we'll talk about that as well. But of course, naturally dealing with the region and dealing with Russia, because this is the big elephant, pink elephant in the room that we're going to talk about. So let me start, before we talk about Europe, before we talk, of course, about the US, let me start with a question to frame the threat assessment. Do you guys believe that Russia is preparing for a conventional war against Europe? And if so, in what time frame? Who wants to start? Dovile?
Yes, of course. And actually, it's not just a subjective opinion. If you look at the framework of Russia's hybrid operations for the past 5 years, they have been working very systematically and consistently across 6 dimensions that are critical for defense of northern eastern flank, from mobility and reinforcement to deterrence, to our lifeline infrastructure and state integrity, to defense industry. If you just look at August, the first 2 weeks of August, we had 4 incidents related to defense industry, and 2 are already attributed to Russia, 2 others are under investigation. Honestly, I think that if we look at the map and stop looking at our own village, metaphorically, we can see that the window of 2027, 2029 is going to be the convergence when China is going to be ready for Taiwan, when Russia is going to still move forward despite all the depletion that it's now experiencing because China is feeding both Russia and Iran. Iran is draining American weapons, and Europe's rearmament is not going to be ready by 2029. And so 2027 and 2029 is going to be the crucial window. And are we ready for that? Is the answer that I'm not satisfied with.
And if that is the case, Dovile, your country is on the front line. Yes, many say that if something starts, it will start in this region. We are just an hour away from Kaliningrad, from the Russian border. You are even closer from both sides. How do you prepare? How does your society prepare? And do you think there's a larger understanding at what is at stake? And I'll have the same question to Zanda in just a moment.
So first of all, being here and talking with you is preparation. As I like to say that if you are informed, you are armed, you are ready, because at least you know what is happening. So total defense, first of all, rests on the will of society to fight. And the better society is informed, the better society understands what is going on, the better their individual efforts complement the state's efforts. So it's from buying arms, from building factories, to working with our allies. Because let's not be naive. Lithuania alone, or Latvia alone, or even Poland alone cannot buy everything we need to deter and, if need be, to defeat Russia. Moreover, what is important for us in that critical time where political trust, where trust among allies has been quite thin on some days, it is up to us to ensure that there is mutual understanding and friendship that endures bad days on certain social media.
Thank you very much, Zanda. Again, you also come from our region. What is your threat assessment, personal and your country's threat assessment when it comes to Russia's activities, which have, of course, ramped up in the last months immensely? And I think there's still very little public understanding of how dangerous territories we are entering.
I think Russia is preparing. But Russia is preparing since the end of the Second World War. Because that's their big pride, what they call the victory. And they are terribly and desperately willing to have another one. So all the mindset, not only of the Kremlin and the butcher in the Kremlin, but the whole society is longing for another attack and another victory in their minds. And that's very dangerous, because it doesn't depend on one person, but it's really a society approach and belief for what Russia, in their perspective, could be great. So it means that now, of course, these threats are growing, also over the last years. And we know that also in Russia, elections are approaching. And we see that for the elections, quite often, Putin decides to attack someone by that consolidating his own society. So we are in more dangerous waters than it was a couple of years ago.
What would you say to people who say, well, they are already fighting a full-scale war in Ukraine and they cannot even seize Donbass for the last 4.5 years? How in the earth can they attack a NATO state? How can they attack NATO? For many people, it feels completely unrealistic.
So what our services say, and experts, that yes, Russia is not capable of attacking us today, or like really tomorrow. So this is not an imminent threat of today. But they might do it a day after. They are preparing for that. We heard also several assessments that it might happen in a couple of months, in 6 months, etc. But the time actually is running out already. And for Russia and for Putin, I think it's not always rational what they really can, but where they put like their emotions, their terrible willings, and what they decide to do, sometimes also for internal usage. That's why I think it's so dangerous that they can opt to do something in circumstances that would be unrealistic and unlogical for a rational country or person.
Thank you very much. So we moved to an American perspective, and Jim, well, two questions. You have dealt with Russia, you know Russia, you've observed what happened in 2022 and how the situation in Ukraine over time has developed. What is your assessment of, the next steps that Russia is preparing for, both in Ukraine and beyond again? And if you could a bit maybe comment on the fact that yesterday we had a visit of the CIA director, Mr. Ratcliffe, in Moscow. That doesn't happen very often. We remember when the CIA director Burns came, when there was a threat that Russia would actually use tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And he gave a big list of things that the United States would do in retaliation to such an escalation on the Russian part. So what do you also make of that specific visit of yesterday in Moscow? But I know there are two questions, but yeah, start with the Fred assessment.
So first on Russia, it's definitely preparing. The question is, what does it intend to do? And I think there are two answers. One is it intends to do what we let it do. So it's very important that we respond to the early provocations by being stalwart, but also by improving our defenses and making clear that there will be penalties to Russia if it continues down this path. That's one step. And the next couple of years are critical because this will be the period when Russia tests us as well as its own capabilities. So the more effective we get all the time, the harder it will be for Russia to mount anything. The real goal for Putin in this, or a minimal goal, is to divide us, to make us not trust one another. That's partly why Russians do things like hire Bulgarians or Ukrainians to carry out sabotage attacks or sow misinformation in our election campaigns so that we don't trust one another. The big division to come in Europe will be between the North, which is establishing itself as a fighting bloc of states, including Poland, the Baltic states, all the way across to the United Kingdom. And then the South, which Russia is making feel more secure, further from any area of contestation. This is why I think it's vital that the United States remain very active in NATO. And you see huge majorities of Americans believing that that role is essential. The difficulty is we have a president who right now always wants to make people think that he will walk away from anything at any time. And that coincides with the time frame that we were discussing earlier, in that the last year or two of his time in office, and while the new administration is getting established, will be a period when Putin will want to test us more and more. Now, why was the CIA director in Moscow? I have no idea. The administration is trying to demonstrate that it is warning Iran's friends around the globe about the consequences of not pushing Iran to settle around the Strait of Hormuz. It's possible that it is that, but one would hope that a visit by a CIA director would also talk about the core security of our allies and the people we depend on to help protect us and who depend upon us as well. And so I would look for more conversation like that. I'm a little disappointed it doesn't appear that the CIA director had consultations in Latvia where he stopped to change airplanes and go in. And I would have liked to have seen that as a sign of allied solidarity going forward.
Great, thank you, Jim, for this. And this takes us actually to the core of our discussions. Are we home alone? If we do agree, and as you said, at least what we call the northern eastern flank of NATO, stretching from the UK to Scandinavia, down to the Baltic, Poland, and Romania also to a large extent, if these countries have a common threat assessment, as they do, and they do understand that Russia is trying to undermine not only our security, but the entire security architecture of Europe, ideally trying to divide NATO member states, break the alliance if possible, then of course this is going to be their goal. But it seems that under this administration, they are potentially hoping to move in that direction. Do you feel under Trump 2.0, because we had that discussion under Trump won. And at that point, there was a lot of grown-ups in the room. We had a lot of people in the first Trump administration who were staunch NATO supporters. Of course, the Congress was and continues to support NATO. But do you feel that the United States is withdrawing from its obligations under the NATO treaty?
No, but the question has been opened, and it's been opened for the first time in maybe 50 years. Look, I'm jealous of all of you, as old people always are of young people, but I'm also a little scared for you because some questions have come back that we haven't really had to address since maybe the mid-70s, early 1980s. For 40 years now, 45 years, America has promised absolute security across Europe. President Obama said, I want President Putin to know that if he crosses a border into one of the Baltic states, they may bump into an American soldier. But the simple fact is, for the first 30 or so years of this time, there wasn't really a threat. So it was an easy promise to make, and it was easy for Europeans to underinvest in their defense for that time. Now we're in a different period, and we need to again say to one another why we intend to work together, to fight together. That's an opportunity. Now, when I look at it, what I see is that for the future, your prosperity is going to be decided by who creates vibrant, rich markets in areas like artificial intelligence, the energy transition, biomedical sciences, and now defense. For that to happen, we're a lot better off if our traditional alliance structures, which is 1 billion pretty rich people, maybe 1.2 billion pretty rich people, we're used to writing rules together, we're used to working with one another. If we say, let's together create the markets that will be a part of the future, that will be based on freedom and democracy, and that's how we'll go forward together. Now, for that to be real, we have to have a strong defense. Just as one minor example of it, more than 99% of the internet depends on undersea cables. As we have seen off the shores of several states, these are easy to slice up, and no one really has the capacity to defend those. If you start to look at the cables that are under the high seas, or the satellites that are the essence of many large businesses now, but also of global communications, you need to have a long pole in the defense tent, that is a superpower like the US, able to bring those tools to bear to protect what we are all fighting for. The reason I'm a little bit nervous is that we've lost the habit of making this case to our populations. And so the political work that you are discussing is a critical part of telling our people why it is we need to be prepared to fight with one another. When we do that in the US, we have always stood by our allies. When we lose the habit, we find that charlatans and incompetent people who want to just be in the news every day are able to tell our people, allies just get you in trouble. Let's be mean to the allies. And that's the thing we have to stop. It's what you and the politicians in particularly the north and east of NATO can do a lot. And by talking about this in terms of markets, what that does is lock in all of the western and southern parts of NATO as well, because they'll see that their prosperity depends on the defense umbrella that's being constructed here.
So in short, you're saying that the commitment of the United States to NATO continues?
Yes.
Okay, that's a very positive. So we're not home alone?
No.
Okay. So if we just, do you agree? Let me start.
I would just want to say, President Trump is going to call it into question at least once over the next year or two, because that's the only way he knows how to be in the news. So I don't want to sound too rosy, but the commitment's there.
Great. Thank you very much. Zanda.
I agree.
So we're all good. We can continue as we were.
No.
Let's go home.
No. But if we think about this analogy of Home Alone, especially for all us Baltic countries, just thinking of being left alone again, it's not a Christmas comedy. It's like a Halloween nightmare, a bit in a Latino style, like Dios de los Muertos. So we do not want to be there again. So we cannot afford that. Then, looking at our differences, inside Europe and also sometimes with the United States, etc. So I think it's not the perspective of being left alone, home alone. I would compare it to the Avengers. So we are very different.
I'm not good at those movies. Explain to me that.
So I guess quite few of you know it.
I know you guys know.
So they're different heroes. They are very different. They have their differences and their disagreements. They do not love each other. But when a threat comes, they realize that working together and building team and using their differences makes them strong and being able to defend.
So what do you think unites us as Europeans? We do understand that the threat perception between the north, east, and the south of Europe is completely different. If you're in Rome or Lisbon, people really don't think about Russia as a threat often, unfortunately. When you're here, it's a completely different story. But what do you think unites us Europeans and the United States, as I understand, in actually being these Avengers? When the threat comes, and we'll also talk about China in a moment, Davila. I'll ask you about this, because it's not only about Russia today, but what do you think makes us want to be together?
It might sound theoretical, but still the idea of democracy. So if we think about democracy versus autocracy, if we think about the liberties we can enjoy, and then that there is a Russia who might attack us, or there's someone else who might totally destroy the system, the democratic benefits we are enjoying every day. Just being here, it's a privilege. Would it be possible if Putin would invade Europe? So these threats actually, I think, bring us together. But then also, yes, we are very different, and we might better learn to use these differences, like the Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. We know the Russians pretty well, unfortunately. Poland also knows. So that's why we were warning that Russia is going to attack Ukraine. So we have the knowledge, we have the experience. We are now also building our capacities. Other countries have their weapons, their power, their scale. And if we are able to merge it, then we are really powerful as Europe and as NATO. At the same time, I dare to say that Latvia is now, and sorry, but exactly Latvia is now the most defended country. The safest in a way, because, so in Latvia we have soldiers from 20 NATO member states, 20. Yes, it's a bit more than 4,000, but the idea, if Russia would try to do something, he's immediately attacking, not Latvia, but immediately on the ground there are soldiers of 20 countries, and that matters, and that's actually unique. Nowhere else we have a military base where 20 nations train together.
I think there's no doubt in this room that in terms of military might, economic power, I mean, we have outgrown Russia 10 times, tenfold. With the United States, 20-fold, I think. That's the scale of the number. But I fear that we are playing a game that is not Russia's game. Russia's game is not to confront us physically, conventionally, with what it has, because it stands no chance against NATO. What I fear, it is playing into dividing our countries from the inside. We, for example, just have seen yesterday a campaign in the Czech Republic media that claim, a very well-organized campaign, that Poland is planning to take over Zaolzie region in the Czech Republic. It's a historical, battle that we had in the 1920s. First the Czechs took it from us, then Piłsudski took it from them, and so on. So, building on these historical resentments, and of course, we saw this in Poland also on the Polish-Ukrainian relations. From 70% of support, 80% of support for Ukraine, this support now is around 40%. And it has been also partly, if not mainly, caused by a very well thought through campaign of using historical grievances that were not addressed by both sides properly, they were not addressed by Ukraine also, to play against our nations. And we see this in the United States. I mean, Russia has failed to actually convince the US public to stop supporting Ukraine. That support is still very high in the United States today, but the MAGA base for some time has become extremely anti-Zelensky, anti-Ukraine, anti-support. Now there's a bit of a turn because Ukraine has shown it can continue fighting and it can continue fighting effectively on Russia's territory. And everybody likes to be the successful avenger, and we want them on our side now, all of a sudden. But again, are we looking at this, clear-sightedly? Can we assess, again, we are afraid today in Europe, many countries are afraid that the United States will not be there if something happens, that Russia will attack in such a way under Article 5 that it's going to be very hard to say, are we really already in war with Russia? But at the same time, by not reacting, NATO not reacting, US not reacting, it will expose the weakness of the whole alliance. Don't you see that threat? Is this something we should be preparing for, and how to address this? Davila.
Well, the United States probably could not react to what is happening in Europe, because the United States, if we look at what was happening in March, had to use its military bases in Europe in its war with Iran.
Well, some were denied to it. Spain
Nevertheless, a lot were used. I think Fairford in England, Lakenheath, destroyers from Rota, missile warning from Pitufik in Greenland, and etc. I mean, sorry about so many papers on my knees, because as a neurodivergent person, I love data. I need to see what is happening and need to see this system, which is now actually looking quite scary, but at the same time, quite hopeful. Why I'm saying that? Because we need each other. United States, even if it is pivoting to Asia, as we have been talking about that for years, cannot actually survive that war without Europe, without falling into a black hole for decades. Not only because of the military basis, but because of the economic connections to Europe. Because integrity of Europe, both structurally, financially, and politically, is the best safeguard that United States has. At the same time, Europe is now finally starting to understand that if we want United States to lead an army, there has to be an army. Actually, I'm practically quoting what I've heard in Pentagon last year. We have to become that army. We have to be strong militarily. And in that sense, what Europe is currently building is resistance, resilience, and ability to finally open our eyes. We are mostly united by Russia, basically, because we, in the Eastern Northern front line, we remember them, from Finns to Estonians to Lithuanians to Latvians. We know what it means when Russians come and when they torture, they mutilate, they murder, they rape. But people in Italy, people in south of Europe or Central Europe or in Czech Republic or in Bulgaria, they are now learning what Russia is doing through their hybrid attacks. The 4 incidents that I mentioned in the first 2 weeks of August in defense industry, that was Bulgaria, that was Italy, that was Germany, and that was Estonia. Hello? We are very much united. At the same time, when we look at the actions of Russia, the pre-positioning, from digging tunnels to hiding caches of weapons in Berlin, to trying to kill Papiga, defense industry leader in Germany, Russia is teaching us very quietly, systematically, or sometimes loudly, that if we allow that toxicity within our societies, the strike will not come from outside. They are sensing from the sea, they are sending a lot of reconnaissance over our nuclear deterrence air bases. They are scaring us with the drones over the eastern border and digging tunnels. But the strikes, the railroad crashes, the explosions, the weapons that I mentioned, the attacks against our critical infrastructure, for example, testing water system in the military base. This is happening within. We know that Russian agency has dozens of thousands of agents in different countries, and we are not yet ready to fight that. But when we talk about United States, we know for sure that Indo-Pacific understood they need Europe. Last year in Shangri-La, every single defense minister of Indo-Pacific states said, we need Europe. And that is revealing itself from defense industry agreements, from Korea openly suggesting to become supply chain part of NATO rearmament, to intelligence sharing agreement. I myself, a defense minister, I initiated intelligence sharing agreement with Japan and our joint exercising with Indo-Pacific states, because it's going to be one war on two front lines. I'm quite sure of that. And in 2023, United States Congress actually agreed with that. They said that United States, its allies and partners may have to deter and, if need be, defeat both Russia and China simultaneously in the window 2027-2035. What we see now is that window is actually coming to the closer part.
Thank you very much, Davila. Before I open the floor to questions, I hope there's already quite a few. I see there's. Okay, maybe I just should move to questions. Let's move to questions. How do we do this? Okay, please. I have the gentleman then who's going to show. If you could introduce yourself and ask the question.
Okay, hello, thank you for letting me ask this question. My name is Laura Orban, and I have a question about if Europe, because it has to be put together to defend our continent, who should be leading the defense system and the defense suppliers and everything? Because should it be done by UE or by one country? How should we do that?
Very important question. We'll definitely address that. The gentleman in the first row, I would take 2 or 3 maybe questions together. If we can, yes, pass the microphone into the first row. Oh, I'm sorry, there's somebody there and then the first row. Please.
Hi, I really like the sentence being informed is being armed. I have a question related to governments, to the representatives of Baltic states. What are your governments doing to kind of provide young people with this armor against Russian disinformation, but also without them feeling like it's too institutional or feeling too much patronized? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one more question in the first row, if we can take, yeah.
Hello. If Europe is serious about defending itself without the United States, what powers should states give to the European level? Should we only have a procurement system, but each decision whether we should engage with war with Russia in Latvia, let's say, or in Tallinn, should be done by the national states, or should we actually have one European army?
Excellent questions. 3 excellent questions. We'll combine them together, and we'll come back for a second round of questions. I see already there in the first rows. Okay, so let's try to combine the first and the third question together, because we haven't really touched upon the fact that Europe has begun to rearm itself. To an extent, it has not been doing since the midst of the Cold War. There's no doubt about the fact that many countries are actually reaching 4%, including our countries. Most countries, almost all, have reached the 2% we've set in 2014 for NATO, 2% of GDP, of course. But a lot of this effort, and we also see this in Poland, a lot of this effort is national defense effort, yes? And it seems also quite logical that it is nations who will defend themselves. But how do we, on the one side, Europeanize the European defense industry? Because this is what we need. We cannot compete with a lot of what the Americans are doing, but we need to have some of the production by ourselves, as we see with the Patriot missiles. Yes, we need to be able to supply the most critical elements for our defense system. But does that mean being apart from the United States and competition to the United States? How do we approach the European defense question? And again, the question was even deeper. Should we have some common decision-making bodies in the area of defense? It's now mainly consultations, yes. There's nothing in Europe that would force us to do something we don't want to do. So how do you perceive this? I'll start with Dovile, Zanda, and then I'll go to Jim with follow-up questions.
So us working in security area have been talking for years that standard and teamwork is the main principle. Standard because we have so many different weapon systems, even munition, even the same type of munition is so different that we cannot work together. And interoperability, when we could exchange with each other on the battlefield, was impossible. So we have gone quite a long way to have as many similar or identical weapon systems as possible, because joint procurement has been moving forward so fast that in few years, I think by 2029, 40% of European military procurement should be joint. And the contracts where 5, 7, 10, 11 countries are buying the same systems together is announced probably every couple of weeks. And just recently, Piorun, the short-range air defense systems from Poland, 5 countries are buying them. Next to that, what we are also doing, we have, I think, to understand this is going to be, as I said, one war on 2 front lines. We cannot compete, United States and Europe. It's not either or. Every single weapon that is going to be produced within allies, territories, and partners, and by partners I mean Indo-Pacific, every single weapon is going to be needed. Every single ammunition round is going to be needed. That's why Korea is stepping into NATO supply chain. That's why when we talk about American weapons, when you look at any platform, so many elements are produced in Europe, some of them in Latin America or wherever, or Japan has supplied PAC-3 for the Patriots, for United States, for Iran. Japan has supplied United States. So we are in the same boat. There couldn't be any competition, just standardization, the same weapons, the same ammo, the same training, interoperability, intelligence sharing, and joint exercises as much as possible, and understanding who is on your team. That would be helpful sometimes.
Absolutely. Zanda.
I think building stronger European capabilities and stronger European defense doesn't mean going without the United States. It's actually building stronger Europe inside a strong NATO. And that's how we should approach it. Yes, and actually, I agree to the idea and to the thesis that the European Union, in a way, is a product of the United States foreign policy after the Second World War. And I dare to say that also, for quite a long time, it was a US policy somehow to be the main partner in defense, and not encouraging Europe to have its own production. So now we are on a different situation, and actually it stimulates Europe. Yes, we need to go much faster. We need to grow the production capacities much faster, and also the procurement system that's so slow. It's much slower than the threats that we are facing. So that's another aspect we have to look at. And then we finally need to cooperate better, like this, for example, competition between German and French military industries. So, guys, we need everything. So that's why we need really to work together, but together.
Jim.
3 points, and these are general political lessons that apply here. One is, we've had almost all these arguments before in the context of NATO. And if you look back in the 1980s, the 1970s, even as far back as when France left the NATO command structure, what we've always come to is an answer. Who will be in charge? It will be a cooperation among the alliance. The US will play a special role, not so much because we're biggest, but because we're not European. And so a lot of the competition and the internal fighting that may break out between European states is something the U.S. helps to ameliorate. Doesn't remove, but we ameliorate it. Now, that led to the U.S. dominating the defense sector, but that's not true any longer because the last 3 years, the way of fighting has changed. The U.S. way of war was to control space and the sky and be more high-tech so that you could fight almost a war that didn't threaten any Americans. That's not the way wars will be fought going forward. Now it will be tech that is developed primarily in and for Ukraine and being produced in Poland, in Bulgaria, in Germany, in other countries, and that will come back to the US. And that provides Europeans with an incredible amount of leverage to decide how they want forces to be used. Second point, this is the importance of joint planning. So here I'll be the boring Avenger, right? The person who gets cut out of all the movies because they're just sitting in the back room. There is a process in NATO. NATO didn't just say, everybody spend 5% because that was a number Donald Trump thought of. It was the result of several years of intensive planning by nerds in uniforms sitting around figuring out who should provide what troops to respond to what threat. Now, that's very reassuring because it's not that you have to ask, will America be with us or will Spain stand with us? You know, and you have to wait until the event, because every day there are people sitting down saying, if Russia does this, the following countries will provide this many soldiers, this type of munitions, this type of capability. And we will know if we have that capability already in place or we have to buy it. That's the place, the real work of defense happens every day, and it's much more reassuring than watching whether the US president shows up late or leaves early from a NATO summit. The third point, time. We are now hitting a point where there'll be US elections in a couple of months. Donald Trump's control over the far right of the United States is beginning to crack. At the moment, people are simply saying to him, his supporters, they're not saying we oppose you, they're just saying, please God, don't make us vote for anything crazy again. And now he's going to lose some of this authority. What that means is it'll get weaker and weaker over the next couple of years. So the task for Europe is to use that time well, to keep America fully engaged, to make the case to the American people and to the next generation of American political leaders for why this alliance is so important. And it's because we believe in the rule of law, and with the rule of law, we will be a market of 1 billion to 1 billion, 2 billion, 4 people who will work together on the industries that are going to matter in the future. And that's the best hope the Earth has. So we make that case for now, we'll last our way through the Trump period.
Absolutely. Do we have time for 2 more questions? I have to look at the organizers.
Let's say rather for the last
Katarzyna.
one, honestly.
Sorry?
Let's say for the last one.
The last one. Well, I think there was a lady here who was holding her hand for a very long time. So if we can, you decide between the 2 of you. Maybe together. They're. Oh my goodness. Will we win this? Yes.
This is the American concern with European
This is the
decision.
American way to solve a problem. Okay, great. A Polish way to solve. Please ask
okay.
your last question and we'll go to the last answer.
Okay,
Yeah.
hello. So my question is, what would you say is the biggest misconception Americans have about European defenses? And what's the biggest misconception Europeans have about Americans' security guarantees, security measures?
Excellent, excellent question. And I also remember the question about disinformation. So if anyone wants to answer to that, we'll start. Again, I'll start with Jim and go forward. Jim, the first question was, what is the biggest misconception that Americans have about Europeans? And
Americans have about Europeans?
Yeah. And in the context of defense, let's, it's not about the cheese and the...
What I find myself explaining to other Americans is how resilient and innovative Europe is. there's a sort of easy line that people use that, oh, all the big new inventions and companies come from the US. That's because we have a deep capital market, and we have encouraged the growth of these oligarch-run companies. So I am going to answer the social media question. And that's fueled the difference between the US and Europe. But what needs to come across is how vibrant, creative, and courageous Europe is. And that's something Americans have turned a blind eye to, I think. And a lot of Americans don't want to hear about it. It has echoes in all this chatter from the American far right that we have forgotten what our civilization is. I think that is, and sorry for the diplomatic term, that's bullshit. Like, in fact, America should recognize Europeans as our natural partners and friends, along with our other allies in Japan, Korea, et cetera. Now, how do we begin to deal with that kind of disinformation, as well as disinformation fomented by Russia and China increasingly and others? The answer to any question here is money. In essence, we have encouraged the growth of digital companies like it's as though we encouraged automobile companies to make their money based on how fast their cars went, rather than whether they could stop in time not to hit things. And so you have to change the calculations that let them make money. Right now they make money by engagement. And what engages people is anger and sadness. And that's what they put up in the algorithms. So until you change the way that the money flows there, they are going to keep doing what they have been doing. And with AI, it will get worse and worse. And if Russian-based content gets them more engagement, they will take down all the defenses and make sure that it reaches teenagers and others. So I'm encouraged that now you see litigation in the US, because we always start with a lawsuit, but you see litigation that is starting to say that product is inherently defective, and they either have to pay for the damage or they have to change what the product is. And the next test for Europe will be to have a discussion about disinformation that is not about how do we chase down false info and how do we protect privacy, but how do we change how companies make money? And they shouldn't be allowed to sell advertising based on content that makes teen girls depressed, teenagers more suicidal, and societies more divided.
Thank you very much, Tim. We have 2 minutes. Davila,
So talking about young people, I think that the biggest mistake that was continuously made is people who are next or even 2 generations away from young people deciding how to talk to young people. As defense minister, I confirmed the budget for the civil resilience education programs, trying to translate them in my mind, which involved mandatory requirement to assemble groups of young people and to decide what works, what doesn't work, what channels are actually accessible to young people, and in current situation, what worries them the most. Because anxiety, lack of trust in the government, that's erosive. That actually has a very long-term negative effect on our ability to build a strong army, because we're all an army. It's not only people with guns. We are every single, each of us, part of the army which is going to be defending our land. Now, when we talk about misconceptions, I think that the biggest misconception is that we are different. Well, actually, when I lived in the United States, I heard so many times, I went for 1 semester in school in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, and they said that United States is a mixing pot of so many nationalities that came from Europe. Your grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents are from Europe. Guys, we are relatives. So honestly, I think that this misconception that Europeans don't understand Americans, I mean, I don't know. Talk to your relatives in Europe, they're still there, and I think we can understand each other better.
Thank you. And Zanda, the last word goes to you.
I would like to merge the 2 questions of misconception and disinformation.
Okay, that will be interesting.
And I think that many of the misconceptions actually comes from our points of view taken, including from social media and some twisted news and ideas. And therefore, it is so important that we always look deeper. And I absolutely agree with you when you previously said that that Russia is trying to divide us as societies, as countries, and use actually this old saying, divide and rule. By dividing us, it's possible to have and gain some control. But I disagree on the point that NATO could do something on that. So Article 5 will not defend us from our clicks in our social media. And my absolute hero in dealing with disinformation is Moldova. Its government and its President Maia Sandu. What they went through and how they managed to defend their country, it's really worth of admiring. And so we can learn from them. Stay strong when Russia tries to divide you and by that to tear apart. And if I may, just one plea. Let's try also for myself and everyone, avoid these anger bites in social media. So let's be more like Dovilia, having the fact-checking in the papers. And that can save, including NATO, because there isn't attempts to divide us also by disinformation than NATO. But we cannot live without that.
Absolutely. Thank you for this plea. I think, anger takes us to also very ugly places often and only sparks more instead of information, instead of debate, instead of explanation. So it looks like, ladies and gentlemen, that it was a quite optimistic take. We're not home alone as Europe. Of course, we have a long way to go to be able to defend the continent, but we believe that at the end of the day, it will be us with the United States, not only on this front, but also on many other fronts that will appear in the years to come. And we wanted to thank you very much for participating in this discussion and for showing interest in international politics, because thanks to people like you, actually, the changes, positive changes in international relations happen. And if you guys are interested in more debate, we invite you also, there's in the expo space, the European Academy of Diplomacy expo, where a lot of experts meet and speak. So we invite you to that as well. Thank you very much. And let's give a great round of applause to our speakers.
Thank you so much. We would like to thank our panelists, Zanda Kalina Lukasiewicza, Dovil Sakalina, and James C. O'Brien, and of course our host, Katarzyna Pisarska. A już o godzinie 20 tutaj w Campus Arenie odbędzie się spotkanie z panem ministrem Marcinem Kierwińskim. Zapraszamy wszystkich serdecznie.